Let's get going. Hi, welcome to another Tuesday Pulse. I'm Chuck Boyce with CV Creative, and this is session 2 of 2, or what I call track B. Track B, I do track A and track B. Track A tends to be more technology oriented, track B tends to be more business oriented. And so, last in session 1, I gave the skills of how to use prompt engineering and context engineering. This will give more of the guardrails. You do need both because the context engineering without governance is just faster output with not understanding what the risk is. So if you went to participated or watched last week and you built a context file, great. Today we're just going to make sure that you're not exposing too much data or data you didn't mean to share, or maybe costing you more than what you realize. And so even if you didn't catch session 1, do a few recap in a few slides, but let's start with a question that most people don't ask is, what should I not put into a context file? So let's go on to, so last week in session 1, we covered context engineering and how to build the various context files, talked a little bit about Markdown and what the difference is and how to actually build the files, what to put in them. And so this is where we talk more about the costs of and what happens if you build them carelessly, or not even carelessly, but if you don't maintain them consistently and you just let them grow and stuff like that. And so these are the types of failures that most SMBs will run into within 60 days of somebody really getting good at context engineering. And so getting good isn't the trigger, it's not protecting it, it's letting them grow. It's how you want to manage and apply just regular business rules against these context files and make sure that they're being monitored and maintained. So none of the risks today that we're going to cover are going to be hard to prevent, but most vendors don't bring them up. And that's why these gaps exist. And so before we get into this week, let's recap last session. Wait, did I skip a file? No. So imagine that you built this great project in Claude and your context file has your company background and your client list and your pricing and your workflow, and the output is great. It's consistent, your team uses it, loves it, and now where does that information go every time somebody runs a prompt? And so if you're using Claude, it goes to Anthropic. If you're using ChatGPT, it goes to OpenAI every time, because that's where they process that data. It's not a bug, that's just how the systems work, that's how context engineering works. And so AI needs the context. Most people building the context files haven't asked themselves what they're actually sending and how often they're sending it and under what terms. And that's what this session answers. So a quick level set for anybody who's new, 90 seconds. So talk about context files, tells AI who you are, what your project is all about, how you work. The project is the container that holds these files and loads them when you work within that project. All the conversations within that project are related to the context files. The context files exist so you don't have to keep typing really long prompts. All your basic information is contained in the context file. The context engineering is how you build, maintain, and use these files consistently, how you organize your projects into folders and what context you include within an individual project. So that's all you really need to know. There's risk categories that we're going to talk about, and those are data exposure. That's where you're sharing third-party information or you're sharing with a third party. And so if you're putting data in and you run a prompt that utilizes a context file, you're sending that context up to Anthropic or OpenAI or Google, depending on which platform you're using. Secondly, the cost creep. Longer files, they may be quietly costing you. Now, if you're using the command line, it's not going to be an issue because your command line is covered in your subscription cost. It's when you start using APIs to make those calls. So the problem with the API calls is that if you have a internally developed program that's making API calls utilizing these context files, if you have multiple people doing it multiple times a day, suddenly you're making lots of different calls depending on the size of the context file. You're sending a lot of data back to whoever the host is, Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, whoever. So then you also have context drift risk, which is what happens when your files go stale. So say you created a context file about your company and you put in information about some department or some functionality, and you have a reorganization or your functionality gets updated, but somebody forgets to update the file. It may be a new product or a new pricing change or something like that. If the context file hasn't been updated to reflect the current reality, every time you run an AI prompt against that, it's using that old outdated data. That's why you need somebody responsible for maintaining and managing these context files. So these are all preventable. None of them require a legal team. They don't require a budget or anything. It's just you have to keep them in mind. And so again, if these aren't maintained within 60 days of somebody getting good at context engineering, they may miss one of these different things. There may be the bloat, they may be the drift, but there's certain things that people haven't thought about. So going deeper, data exposure. Everything you put in, it's sent up to the platforms, as I said. And so if it's processed by whoever, Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, depending on the tool, you're sending it to a third-party third party. And so unless you have, if you have client contracts that request you to keep control of their data, it may be a violation of your contract. And so just remember, you're sending this to a third party. There's going to be a third party involved. Quality protections depend on your plan. And so the low-level free plans don't have default protections. You have to go in and actually turn things, don't use my data for training, but still data is being sent up. That's a kind of what's called shadow AI, which causes some problems, which I think I mentioned later in this presentation. So most consumers and small business plans don't guarantee zero data retention. The exact terms vary from company to company and they change over time. So again, somebody has to look at these policies and see if they've changed and if they have to modify their terms. Again, most start with entry-level tiers, and they don't have the same controls as the pro, and especially not as the enterprise grade levels. And so again, the difference is the free, of course, is free. The $20 plans maybe have a next level of security. The $100 or $200 plan may have more, and then the higher level after that may even have more protections. And so depending on what level, you have to monitor how protected you are. Your context file, if it contains client data, the data goes with every prompt. If you're running 50 prompts a day as a team, that data is being transferred 50 times a day. So again, it doesn't mean stop using context files, just be deliberate, because the risk is real, but it's also manageable. And it's never discussed in any of your onboarding materials, especially if you buy something from a third party or a custom app or something like that. You just have to be aware of these, and most people aren't. And so that's why I'm doing this. So what not to put into a context file? Anything that's high risk, anything that will damage your reputation, your financial platform, or your clients. So don't put in client names, don't put in contact details, don't put in project specifics. If your context file says that you serve ABC company and include that contact in your firm, then that's going to be a problem, because going up to one of those vendors, Anthropic or OpenAI, every time that prompt is sent. Do not put financial data. Financial data could be your revenue, it could be strategies, it could be account numbers, it could be social security numbers, anything related to financial. Now that doesn't include publicly announced. If you have your pricing on your website, you can include your pricing in your context file. But if you're doing what your actual cost is, you don't want to put your cost in there. You want to put whatever you publicly display, you can include that in a context file. Don't include any employee personal information. That's just standard PPI, personal protective information and stuff like that. Names are fine. Positions may be fine. But home addresses, compensation, performance details, don't ever put any of that in there. Anything under a non-disclosure agreement, an NDA, or any contract confidentiality, if you signed an NDA to protect data, that cannot be in a context file because you're sharing it with a third party. If you're dealing with patients in a HIPAA world or students in a FERPA world, which is the Federal Education Rights Protection. HIPAA is the insurance protection, the hospital protection. And so those are government regulated, anything related to patients or students or anything personal. Any of those things you should not put in. It's not optional. It's a federal you're breaking federal law if you do that. And so never put in login credentials, API keys, internal system details. I've seen this. Somebody loads it into the credentials. If you've followed anything about the OpenClaw things, the initial when it was first released, there was none of the security protections and people were exposing API keys and all sorts of delicate information. Those are things that you don't want to put in. But on the other side, what you can include, again, maybe a employee's name, their role, your company description, what your tone and voice rules are, generic workflow descriptions, but no client-specific details. You may have approved output examples, scrubbed of names, high-level policy constraints, anything that is useful for the file, publicly known, that's all fine. So if a good question would be, if you would hand this document to a new contractor without a signed NDA, that would probably be good. But if you say, this is a contractor, not an employee. So if you are publicly handing them information that is not without an NDA, it's probably safe to be put in. And so looking at policies, each one has a different version, but here's what you need to know. With Anthropic, the customer plan conversations may be used to improve the models unless you opt out. The API and team plans have stronger protections, but they explicitly state your data isn't used for training by default. If you're on Claude Pro and haven't checked your privacy settings, do that today. With ChatGPT, similar structure, the free and plus plans allow training use unless you opt out. Team and enterprise, they have stronger controls. They're not on by default, but you should verify that they're not turned on. Gemini is different because you can do regular Google Gemini with a non-secure account, and that is more difficult to find where it's stored because it's not stored within Gemini, it's stored within your Google account. If you're using Google Workplace, that's more controlled at the administrative level, and there's more strict controls over how you can do that into the Gemini, the Google world. And so, but again, the lower based plans and just to show you, here I'll go into each of my, I use Workplace, and so I won't be able to show you Gemini, but for example, in Claude, go into Claude, first thing you do is drop down into your little lower left-hand corner, your little icon, go to Settings. Once you're in Settings, you go to Privacy. When you're in Privacy, it is Help Improve Claude. Disable that. This Claude is learning from your material. Now you're safe. In ChatGPT, very similar. You drop down into the profile, your settings, go to data controls, and improve the model for everyone. Here, turning it on, OpenAI is training your material. Turn it off. You're safe. Again, I can't show you what Gemini is because I have a workplace. But again, you go into your account, data privacy, and there's an AI activity controls. Turn that off. Notice how they don't say that you're using my data. Well, Claude says use my data, but improve the model for everyone. That's kind of vague. They just say AI security controls. And so just remember, look at those and see where you are. So, compliance. You don't need a big document. If you've seen any of my previous governance and compliance episodes of this webinar, I've talked about how you just create some basic tools, because when it comes to compliance, all you have to do is answer these 4 questions. Question 1, what tools are approved for business use? All you need is a spreadsheet. This tool is approved for this task. So for example, Claude is good for drafting message communications and advertising. ChatGPT is used for research. Otter is used for meeting notes. Just write it down, keep a simple spreadsheet, document it. 1 sentence just proves it prevents a lot of shadow AI. And another thing, once you do this, is communicate it to your employees, because if they don't know, if you don't tell them, here's our approved list, don't use these other tools, and they use them, you can't fault them because you did not tell them not to use it and tell them which tools they can use. And so this is a good compliance, prevents you from potential legal situations. The next question, what categories of data are off limits? So you have to explicitly document. Client names can't be used. Financial records can't be used. Anything under NDA can't be used. Any regulated data can't be used. Document it, 1 paragraph, post it where your team knows they can find it, and train them on it. Explain, here's our AI policy. Keep 1 folder accessible to everybody. Here's our approved tools. Here's our approved data usage. Question 3, who reviews it? Here's one thing that a lot of clients don't do, is they don't assign an AI person, or they think they have to hire somebody. But the thing is that you may have somebody on your team that just loves using AI, and they may not be in technology or something like that, but they could be your go-to AI person who reviews your output process and reviews every piece of whatever goes out, whatever goes in the context file. Somebody has to maintain these. Name a human reviewer and have somebody responsible for your AI, because if something does go wrong, you have to say, you can't say it was the AI's fault. You have to have a human. You can't use that excuse. If something legal happens, you can't just say, well, it was the AI. That has proven to be wrong. Big penalties. So 4, who's responsible when something goes wrong? Again, most teams can't answer that. That is your AI point person. So AI made a mistake is not an acceptable answer if the client calls. It is not defensible in court. It's not an explanation. Somebody on your team has to own it. I cannot express that strong enough. These are very huge things. Compliance and governance is becoming a huge issue in 2026, and the fines are outrageous. So here is your gate check for your context files. Number 1 is your process. Is this a documented, stable workflow? And this falls into what I refer to as the 5 blind spots. It's a methodology that I use to help people figure out if they're ready for automating AI and implementing AI on a larger scale. So number 1 is your process. Before you can say, I'm going to update my customer support workflow with AI, is your customer support workflow documented in a stable manner that can be repeated every single time? If it can't be automated. So if the workflow changes every month, if everybody handles it a little bit differently, the context file can't be written. And if it changes every month, the context files needs to be updated every month. And so every workflow should be documented first, stabilized, and then possibly automated. Number 2 is the data. Is it containing client, employee, or regulated information? If it is, stop, take it out, review. Uh, 3 is the people. Does the person who owns the workflow know what's going into that context file? This one surprises people because you may have a process that was developed by Joe in accounting, and you put Joe in accounting developed this process and we're using it, and it's put into the context file. If Joe doesn't know that he is in a context file, that is a potential legal situation. And so governance includes transparency. If you're going to use a person's name, let them know that they're in this context file. That's just standard governance. A lot of people miss that one. The cost, how long is the file? The size of the context file deals with the number of tokens. And if you're not familiar with tokens, tokens are actually about 4 to 6 characters, and the characters can include punctuation and spaces. And so it's not actually words, it's just 4 to 6 bits of data, characters of data, and that's what's considered a token. So the longer your context files are, the more tokens you're sending to that provider, whether it's the Anthropic, OpenAI, or Google. And so just remember that the longer your context files, the more often they're used, the more data you're sending in. And if you're using APIs, that's what charges are based on your tokens. And so you just have to control the size of your context file. The last is your compliance. Does your AI use policy cover this content? And so if you don't have a policy, most people don't, that's a flag. Write a policy. I've talked about this in other episodes, and it's just something that you have to be aware of. So going back to cost creep, context files aren't free when you're using API. Again, when you're using the command line, you don't have a problem. But if you're using APIs, especially it's automated and multiple people are using those APIs, here's your rough math. 500, 600 to 700 tokens, 500 words. As I said, punctuation, spaces, all contain our characters. And so tokens are character-based, not word-based. And so even if it's 500 words, it could be about 600 or 700 tokens. Figure 900 tokens per call, and you add a 200 word prompt to that, it goes up to 900 calls. You make 500 calls a month. Suddenly, it really starts to get expensive. And so most teams don't budget for it. That's one of those hidden costs that suddenly, when I first started using vibe coding, I had a $47 a month package. I used it for a while, made lots of calls, data calls and stuff, and I got a $350 bill the next month. It's like, wow, how did that happen? And it's token usage, database usage, and things like that. Hidden costs that aren't included in your subscription costs. So keep your files focused. Don't load everything you've ever written. Make it specific, monitor, and use them appropriately. And that's where you get your bloat, because the bloat they can grow to be like 3,000 words over 6 months just by, oh, let's just add one more thing. And every time you add one more thing, are you removing things? Are you duplicating information? I try to keep the quality. So if you keep adding, you may hit a point of diminishing returns. So the more questions aren't the answer, it's clearer, fewer instructions. That's what you want to focus on. So it may contain contradictory information from different edits. So 1 month you wrote, let's use a formal tone in a professional manner. And then 3 months later, somebody adds, let's write conversationally, but they're both in the same file. AI now has to guess, should we use this formal tone or do we want to write conversationally? You're confusing the AI. Make sure that there's not contradictory instructions. If nobody in your team knows exactly what's written there, the point is, if that one person who's your AI guy or gal can't summarize the context file from memory within 2 minutes, it's too long and too complicated. Keep it simple enough that somebody on your team knows exactly what's in it. Next is the output. It's inconsistent. If you're over-engineering, can be producing worse results than a simple one. So contradiction, competing instructions are normally the cause. Simplify, review, make sure that there isn't that bloat. And then if the file covers 12 different use cases, you probably need to have 12 different projects and not have those 12 use cases within a single project. And so, again, that is a very regular use or in instance of how files can bloat. And again, the bigger the file, the more it's used, the more tokens are being used. So, one project per distinct use case. If you haven't started using projects, please get into the habit of using it, because every project can have multiple context files and it's specific to that particular project. The project can also have its own instructions too. And so it's just get in the habit of using projects instead of keeping everything at one level. Next is to review and trim. Just have somebody's on schedule to make it just a common task is to review what's in the file. Doesn't have to take a long time, 10 or 15 minutes. It's not a project, it's just maintenance. And so a 60-day review is where you catch drift, which is risk 3. The drift is where your business changes, but the context files don't. And so it happens over time. You may have something that's 6 months out of date. At one time it sounded great, but then you send something out to a client and you forgot to update the context file, and suddenly they get a wrong price or a wrong contact or something different, and then they're asking questions. And again, if something like that happens and it happens to have a reputational damage or something else, that could present a problem, and it's not the AI's problem, it's the person who is responsible for maintaining that. And so make sure that you have a simple system that you can catch this before it reaches the client, which is a simple review check every 60 days. Just your company description, does it reflect what we still do? The tone and voice, is it formal? Is it conversational? Is it casual? Whatever, if that changes how you communicate with your clients, make sure that your tone is set properly. If your workflows change, have any steps been added? Have any personnel changes happened? Those are things that you want to review. Same with policy constraints. If there's any new additions, any new processes, any changes, make sure that your AI point person is the person who owns this, because if something is wrong, it's not the AI, it's the person responsible for maintaining these files. That's that point person. So it doesn't have to be a full-time person. It just needs to do, that person has 4 responsibilities. Number 1 is to maintain and review on that 60-day cycle. Just keep the current content, avoid the drift by catching it before it happens. Make sure that workflows are documented, old ones get retired. You may have an archive folder that you put old context files into, so you can have a historical trail of what used to work. If you make a change to a new version and now something doesn't work, you have something to fall back onto. And so just make sure that you don't just delete old files, that you do keep an archive of them. They need to approve the output. So not every piece, anytime you use AI, you should not just trust what it puts out and automatically deliver that to a client. You should always have a human in the loop and approve what output goes to a client. That's just a safety feature. Some of these agents that try to do everything, and there's companies that are saying, we'll just have the agent do everything, unless you're, which is kind of silly, but you should always keep a human in the loop. I think agents are really cool, but I keep human in the loop. I review. And so number 3 is fielding team questions. And so if people on your team have questions about AI, why did this work? If somebody asks, can I use this tool? That point person can review the approved tools, the approved uses. If somebody says, hey, what about this tool? Instead of saying, no, don't use it, research it. Figure out, does it work for the company? It may be a better tool than what you're currently using. So don't dismiss other people who may come up with good ideas. Involve the employees. They won't feel threatened by AI. They'll feel empowered. And so involve the team, ask them questions, keep them informed about what they can use, what they should use. If they question about why, ask them if they have a better idea and see if it is a better idea. So always keep that one-page AI use policy current. And so with a 5-person team, this may take a couple of hours a month. With a 15-person team, may double that. But again, something that a couple of hours in a month isn't that big a deal. It doesn't require a brand new role. But if nobody's being responsible for the outputs, you may have a compliance or a governance problem. So just make sure that you're aware of this. So the one-page use policy, it's like, oh, they picture a legal document, and it's not necessary. You don't need to bring lawyers in unless you're in a regulated environment or it does require legalities. If you're doing things with clients in medical or insurance or finance, you may need to get a lawyer involved. But for most small businesses, you don't. You just have to document. Document is going to cover yourself. It will show that you've made an attempt to control things. It may not prevent you from losing a law case, but if you don't have tools, having these approved tool lists, having your off-limit content, what can't go in, having a review policy, and having an incident response. If you have that AI folder that's accessible to everybody and they know these, then you have a reason to say that we're making a best effort to do something. And so look back at some of my previous episodes to find out what these documents are, how to create them. Again, the first round may take you a couple of hours, but after that, it could take that couple of hours every 60 days. And so it's getting started is the hard part. Once it's done, maintaining it is relatively easy. And so here is a problem. Here is an example of a bad context file. And so here is about our firm. We're a financial consulting firm based in Atlanta. We work with small business owners preparing for exit. Our primary contact for most engagements is Sarah Chen, Managing Director. The current client engagements. Oh, we're dealing with Johnson Manufacturing, Bob Johnson at this phone number, Meridian Health Group. They have an NDA, confidential. Our pricing, our standard retainer is $3,500. Exit planning starts at $1,200. You write in a professional, warm tone. Use clear, direct sentences. Avoid jargon. Alternatively, keep it conversational and accessible. Don't over-formalize. Your workflow when preparing client summaries. Reference our standard 90-day engagement format developed by Tom Walters, who leads our operations team. So you can look at that and you could probably think, based on what I just said, where's the problem? So number one problem, the client is named embedded into the workflow example. Again, I said that should not be something that you do. Problem number two is going to be your pricing information. All of those with problem one and problem two, you had client names, contact details, NDA references, specific pricing. That all needs to be come out, unless that pricing is on your website. But if it's specific to a certain client, that should come out. All you have to do is erase that from the file. You don't have to rewrite the file, it's just remove those things. The person problem. Tom Walters was named as the workflow, owning the workflow. Does Tom know that he's mentioned in this? If not, you should probably take it out. Otherwise, inform him. He may be happy that he's being referenced. But again, if he doesn't know, it could be a potential liability. The cost of this file is roughly 200 words. If this were 2,000 words, you talk about splitting it, doing multiple projects. Again, this one here was 200 words. By removing the information that shouldn't be in there, it drops it down to 100 words. And so, again, maintaining. And then compliance, that's the last one. Our policy permit, client names in the context files. No, it shouldn't be. And so remove those. Again, very simple, but look at the voice section. That one said, write in a professional, warm tone. Use clear, direct sentences. But 2 lines later, it says, keep it conversational and accessible. Those contradict each other. AI is going to guess depending on which is first in its memory. Pick one, remove the other. The cleaned version still does everything the original is trying to do. The voice is there, the workflow context is there, the scope is there. It just doesn't carry the risk. And so here's a little scorecard we can look at. So rate yourself on these, each on a scale of 1 to 5. Look at your platform awareness. Do you know which AI platforms your team is using? Which plan each person is on? It's not a guess. You should actually know that. Are they on a pro plan? Are they on a personal plan? Are they on an enterprise plan? If you don't know this, score how high you think it is, 1 to 5. Next is to look at your context files. Does it contain client names, financial information, regulated information? If you haven't audited them, give yourself a 1 to 5 on where you think your context files are. Next is your data training. Have you turned it off? Have you reviewed the training settings on every platform that you're using? Not just the 3 that I've mentioned before, but every AI tool may have privacy settings, but that goes beyond context files. But still, you should be aware of your data training settings. Make sure that you're aware and that they're turned off. Rate yourself 1 to 5. Do you have a name point person? That should probably be a 1 or a 5, but somewhere in there, somebody may be responsible for some AI things, but not everything. Just make sure you have a point person. Next is your review. Has it been reviewed in the last 60 days? A 1 to 5. Written policy. Do I have even a 1-page AI policy shared? Give yourself a 1 to 5. If you score under 10, pause. Fix everything before fixing. Just fix those things. 10 to 19, you may have 1 or 2 gaps. Start with naming the owner, reviewing the context files, and go from there. If you're in 20 to 30, you're probably pretty good. Just focus on your review cycle. So this is just a quick self-test of where you should be, where you probably are. Most are going to be in this 10 to 12 range. Not bad, but fixable. And so just make sure that you're prepared. Very easy to do. Week 1, audit yourself. Audit your files, create the files, make sure that they follow those 5 gates. Review, remove anything that shouldn't be there. Week 2, check your data training on all the platforms that your team uses. Make sure that they're using your team version, your pro version, your enterprise version, and not a personal version that they are purchasing themselves or they're using for free. If you're saying our business is using Claude and we have the Claude enterprise package and everybody needs to use that, but somebody else is using ChatGPT, make sure that you're aware of that and that they're not using it. Tell them our approved is Claude. Do not use ChatGPT. They may use it at home, but make sure they're not using company data at home. And so there's certain things that's what's called shadow AI, is where people use, the employees are using tools because they think it's helping their job. They're being better, they're being faster, they're putting employee information into an unapproved tool, and that's where data leaks come from, and that's what's called shadow AI, and that's where most of the legal problems come into play, is because an employee either wasn't aware of policies or they broke the policy. But that's what's called shadow AI, and that's where a lot of these legal issues are coming from. So then week 3, make sure that you have an AI policy. Very easy, 4 sections, 1 paragraph each. Share it with the team. Get 1 round of feedback. Don't have to be perfect. Revise it month to month, week to week, however, until you're comfortable with it. But always get feedback on that. And then the ownership is a really huge thing that most people forget, is name a point person, have them responsible for reviewing these, reviewing output. Make sure that you have ownership, because again, you can't blame AI. You have to have a point person. So Looking back at both of them, so last session gave you how to build these, what should be in, how to write a prompt, how to build a context file, how to use projects. That's the capability side. This one, I'm giving you the guardrails. Here's what not to put in, how to manage your cost, how to avoid drift, how to be more compliant. You need both. Neither one is complicated. Be aware of them. Both require someone to own them. And so if you're building workflows, you're building a reputable, reviewable system. It just happens to be AI, but documented first, make it repeatable, then bring AI in, and it will probably be improved. So the next steps, I'm going to give in fact, let me jump over here and get this. I'll give you these files here. I'll drop them into the chat for those live. Here is the link to these files. And so, first one is your 5-gate audit check. That is just an audit file from what I mentioned in slide 11. You could run that, your existing files this week. There's the one-page policy template, pre-formatted with the 4 sections. Fill it in, share it with your team. There's the platform settings reference card, which shows how to opt out of Claude, ChatGPT, and Gemini all on one page. Give that to your point person. There's the 60-day review template, drift checklist from 16, put that on a date on your calendar, make sure it's followed. And then the combined scorecard from both of them, useful for where things are going. If you haven't seen some of these tools that I have available, I have a 3-minute readiness check, which is what covers the 5 blind spots. Takes about 3 minutes to run. Very simple. If you run it, it'll give you an instant result. If you put in your email address, you'll get emailed a little more complete form of that report. If you have a specific process that you're interested in automating with AI, you can run the assessment.cbcreative.com, and that is a 20-minute. It starts with 4 questions specific to the process, and then it goes through the 5 sections of the blind spots and gives you a much more in-depth report. And again, if you want to register, if you're already registered, these session links stay the same. But if you haven't registered and you're watching this on a recording, here's the link. Join us live if you can. But I also put these on YouTube normally within 24 hours. And so 2 sessions are done. That's really about it. I do have a couple of other questions that come up constantly, such as, I already have a context file. Do I need to delete it and start over? And that's simple. No, just make sure that you run through all of the things I covered today, edit it, remove the high risk, and trim the bloat. You don't have to rewrite and start from scratch. Number 2 is what if my team is already using tools I haven't approved? And that's very common, but as long as you start having a list of approved tools, you let people know what that list is, then they don't have an excuse. If they have a tool that they like to use and want to, review it. Add it to your list if it's worthwhile, but have an answer if they're already using a tool. Don't say, you can't use that tool. Give them a reason why, give them an alternative to use. Another question is, Claude safer than ChatGPT for content? No, it's not about the tool. It's about what you're sending up. They're comparable on every level. Their free plans, their pro plans, their enterprise plans. Their protections are very similar across each one. It's what you're putting in and what they're sending. So again, if a user is using a personal version and they have bad data, that just needs to be controlled. So make sure that it doesn't matter whether it's Claude or Chat, it's just make sure that you have the policies in place. Another one is what happens if AI output causes real problems with a client. Again, you have an incident response action, a section in your policy that talks about what happens. It all comes back down to that point person. You cannot blame AI. AI can't get it wrong. AI can get it wrong, but it can't be your defense. There's a point person who's responsible for correcting these, and that's your response if something causes a real problem. Have an incident response section. Do I need a lawyer to write these policies? Normally, no. For most small businesses, unless you're dealing with this is just an operational document. It's not a contract. But if you are in a regulated industry, if you're dealing with something that's part of a client agreement, then have a lawyer look at it. It doesn't have to be a long document, but if it deals with anything that could result in a lawsuit, bring a lawyer in. How do I handle a team member who opposes or uses an unapproved tool? If they've been trained on what your approved policies are, what tools they can use, and they use a different one instead, then you have an employee discipline problem. If they use a problem or product that causes problems, but you didn't tell them that they couldn't use it and give them an alternative, then it's more of an HR problem. And so everything can be documented. So you can't blame an individual for using a tool that they weren't aware that they weren't able to use. And then one of the last questions is we use AI with client data as part of our service. Just make sure that it's clean. Remember, if you have any NDAs or governance policies, that those override whatever you're sending out. And so just make sure that you're covered. And with that, I'm going